mean riding in here as though you had carrion and cavalry on your tail? Some of the other horses were frisking, catching the bay's mood. Never rode that hard unless we was chasing them, my lord. Barham's grin faded when the man saw he was not laughing. Well, my lord, I seen the horses, and I reckoned... The man took another look at his face and cut off that line. Well, actually, I got some news, too. I've been over to New Braham to see my sister, and I heard plenty. New Braham was older than Andor. Old Braham had been destroyed in the
give me
Chalk
1
Wars
second,
1,000 years
everyone.
before Arthur Hawkwing. And it was a good place for news. A middling-sized border town, well to the east of his estates, on the road from Camelin to Tarvalin. Even with Morghase's current attitude, the merchants would keep that road busy. Well, out with it, man. If there's news, what is it? Just trying to figure where to start, my lord. Barham straightened unconsciously, as though making a report. Most important, I reckon. They say Tyr has fallen. Ailman took the stone itself, and the sword that cannot be touched has flat been touched. Somebody drew it, they say. And Aiel drew it, Bryn said incredulously. And Aiel would die before he touched a sword. He had seen it happen in the Aiel War. Though it was said Kalendor was not really a sword at all, whatever that meant. They didn't say, my lord. I heard names. Vren somebody or other most often. But they was talking it like fact, not rumor. Like everybody knew. Bryn's forehead creased in a frown. Worse than troubling, if true. If Kalendor had been drawn, then the dragon was reborn. According to the prophecies, that meant the last battle was coming, a dark one breaking free. The dragon reborn would save the world, so the prophecies said, and destroy it. This was news enough by itself to upset Holly Galloping, if he had thought twice. But the leathery fellow was not finished. Word come down from Tarvalin is near as big, my lord. They say there's a new Amerlin seat. Elida, my lord, who was the queen's advisor. Blinking suddenly, Hala hurried on. Morghaze was forbidden ground, and every man on the estate knew it, though Bryn had never said so. They say the old Amerlin, Swan Sanche, was stilled and executed, and Logain died too, that false dragon they caught in Gentle last year. They talked it like it was true, my lord. Some of them claimed they was in Tarvalin when it all happened. Logain was no great news, even if he had started a war in Gillidan by claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. There had been several false dragons the last few years. He could channel, though. That was a fact. Until the Aes Sedai gentled him. Well, he was not the first man to be caught and gentled, cut off from the power, so he could never channel again. They said men like that, whether false dragons or just poor fools the Red Adja took against, never lived long. It was said they gave up wanting to live. Swan Sanche, though, that was news. He had met her once, nearly 3 years ago. A woman who demanded obedience and gave no reasons. Tough as an old boot, with a tongue like a file and a temper like that of a bear with a sore tooth. He would have expected her to tear any upstart claimant limb from limb with her bare hands. Stilling was the same as gentling for a man, but more rare by far, especially for an Amerlin seat. Only 2 Amerlins in 3,000 years had suffered that fate, so far as the tower admitted, though it was possible they could have hidden 24 more. The tower was very good at hiding what they wanted hidden. But an execution on top of stilling seemed unnecessary. It was said women survived stilling no better than men did gentling. It all stank of trouble. Everyone knew the tower had secret alliances, strings tied to thrones, and powerful lords and ladies. With a new Amerlin raised in this fashion, some would surely try to test whether the Aes Sedai still watched as closely. And once this fellow in Tyr quelled any opposition, Not that there was likely to be much if he really did have the stone. He would move against Ilion or Kyrian. The question was, how quickly could he move? Would forces be gathered against him or for him? He had to be the true dragon reborn, but the houses would go both ways, and the people too. And if petty squabbles broke out because the tower... "Old fool," he muttered. Seeing Barham give a start, he added, "Not you, another old fool." None of this was his affair any longer, except to decide which way House Bryn went when the time came. Not that anyone would care, except to know whether or not to attack him. Bryn had never been a powerful house, or large. My lord?" Barham glanced at the men waiting with their horses. "Do you think you might need me, my lord?" Without even asking where or why. He was not the only one bored with country life. "Catch up to us when you have your gear together. We'll be heading south on the Four Kings Road to start." Barham saluted and dashed away, dragging his horse behind him. Climbing into his saddle, Bryn swung his arm forward without a word, and the men fell into a column of twos behind him as they headed down the oak lane. He meant to have answers. If he had to take this Mara by the scruff of the neck and shake her, he would have answers.
The High Lady Altima relaxed as the gates of the royal palace of Andor swung open and her carriage rolled in. She had not been certain they would open. It had surely taken long enough to get a note taken in, and longer still to have a reply. Her maid, a thin girl acquired here in Camelin, goggled and all but bounced on the seat across from her at the excitement of actually entering the palace. Snapping open her lace fan, Altima tried to cool herself. It was still well short of midday. The heat would grow worse yet. To think she had always thought of Andor as cool. Hastily she reviewed what she meant to say one last time. She was a pretty woman. She knew exactly how pretty, with large brown eyes that made some mistakenly think her innocent, even harmless. She knew she was neither, but it suited her very well to have others believe her so, especially here, today. This carriage had taken almost the last of the gold she had managed to carry away when she fled Tyr. If she was to re-establish herself, she needed powerful friends, and there was none more powerful in Andor than the woman she had come to see. The carriage halted near a fountain in a column-ringed courtyard, and a servant in red and white livery rushed to open the door. Altima barely glanced at the courtyard or the serving man. Her mind was all on the meeting ahead. Black hair spilled to the middle of her back from beneath a close-fitting cap of seed pearls, and more pearls lined the tiny pleats of her high-necked gown of watery green silk. She had met Morghese once, briefly, 5 years ago during a state visit, a woman who radiated power, as reserved and stately as one should expect of a queen, and also proper in the Andoran way, which meant prim. The rumors in the city that she had a lover, a man not much liked, it seemed, did not fit that very well, of course. But from what Altima remembered, the formality of the gown and the high neck should please Morghese. As soon as Altima's slippers were firmly on the paving stones, the maid, Kara, leaped down and began fussing over the fall of the pleats, until Altima snapped her fan shut and slapped the girl's wrist with it. A courtyard was no place for that. Kara, such a foolish name, flinched back, clutching her wrist with a wounded look and the beginnings of tears. Altima compressed her lips in irritation. The girl did not even know how to take mild reproof. She had been fooling herself. The girl would not do. She was too obviously untrained. But a lady had to have a maid, especially if she was to differentiate herself from the mass of refugees in Andor. She had seen men and women laboring in the sun, even begging in the streets, while wearing the remnants of Kyrian and noble's garb. She thought she had recognized one or two. Perhaps she should take one of them in service. Who could know the duties of a lady's maid better than a lady? And if they were reduced to working with their hands, they should leap at the chance. It might be amusing to have a former friend for a maid. Too late for today, though. And an untrained maid, a local girl, said a little too clearly that Altima was at the edge of her resources, only one step removed from those beggars herself. She put on a look of concerned gentleness. "Did I hurt you, Kara?" she said sweetly. "Remain here in the carriage and soothe your wrist. I'm certain someone will bring you cool water to drink." The mindless gratitude on the girl's face was stupefying. The liveried men, well trained, stood looking at nothing at all. Still, word of Altima's kindness would spread if she knew anything about servants. A tall young man appeared before her in the white-collared red coat and burnished breastplate of the Queen's Guard, bowing with a hand to his sword hilt. "I am Guardsman Lieutenant Talanvor, High Lady. If you will come with me, I will escort you to Queen Morghese." He offered an arm, which she took, but otherwise she was scarcely aware of him. She had no interest in soldiers, unless generals and lords. As he attended her down broad corridors, seemingly full of scurrying men and women in livery, they took care not to impede her way, of course. She subtly examined the fine wall hangings, the ivory-inlaid chests and high chests, the bowls and vases of chased gold or silver, or thin sea-folk porcelain. The royal palace did not display as much wealth as the Stone of Tyr, but Andor was still a wealthy land, perhaps even as wealthy as Tyr. An older lord would do nicely, malleable for a woman still young, perhaps a touch feeble and infirm. With vast estates, that would be a beginning, while she found out exactly where the strings of power lay in Andor. A few words exchanged with Morghese some years ago were not much of an introduction, but she had that which a powerful queen must want and need: information. Finally, Talanvor ushered her into a large sitting room with a high ceiling painted in birds and clouds and open sky, where ornately carved and gilded chairs stood before a polished white marble fireplace. A part of Altima's mind noted with amusement that the wide red and gold carpet was Tyran work. The young man went to one knee. "My queen," he said in a suddenly rough voice, "as you have commanded, I bring you the High Lady Altima of Tyr." Morghese waved him away. "You are welcome, Altima. It is good to see you again. Sit, and we will talk." Altima managed a curtsy and murmured thanks before taking a chair. Envy curdled inside her. She had remembered Morghese as a beautiful woman, but the golden-haired reality told her how pale that memory had grown. Morghese was a rose in full bloom, ready to overshadow every other flower. Altima did not blame the young soldier for stumbling on his way out. She was just glad he was gone, so she would not have to be aware of him looking at the two of them, comparing. Yet there were changes, too. Vast changes. Morghese, by the grace of the Light, Queen of Andor, Defender of the Realm, Protector of the People, High Seat of House Papand, so very reserved and stately and proper, wore a gown of shimmering white silk that showed enough bosom to shock a tavern maid in the mall.
Yeah, it's about 20 pounds.
Thigh close enough to suit a Tarabon or Jade. The rumors were clearly true. Morghese had a lover, and for her to have altered so much, it was equally clear that she tried to please this Gabriel, not make him please her. Morghese still radiated power and a presence that filled the room, but that dress transformed both to something less.
No, my brother had it. It's
Altima
for
was
doing
doubly glad
stencils.
she'd worn a high neck. A woman that deep in a man's
It's for
thrall
doing
could lash
stencils
out in
for
a jealous
tattoos.
rage on the
Ow!
smallest
I just hit
provocation,
myself with it.
or none at all. If she met Gabriel, she would present him as near indifference as civility would allow.
I'm not sure who did it. It was given to my brother to do tattoo stencils. But yeah, it's about 15, 20 pounds. Oh, since I got you here, let's just check out the one I just did. It's 40 by 40. Nice. Yeah, but my light table I'm working with is it's a beast. Are you just wanting to listen to autobiographies or like fiction? Oh, that sits on my little TV tray. Huh? I was talking about your audiobooks. I think you're a little bit behind. Give me 1 second. I gotta go put this back. Okay, D man. I'll eventually get a good one like yours. Excuse me. Light table that's not a 20-pound one. I know, that's what I was saying. I need to get one like yours.
Say LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit
Nice.
LibriVox.org. Today's reading by Kara Schallenberg, www.krag.org. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 1. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd of May. Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place from the glimpse
Dracula?
which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east, the most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and
I just don't know which one I'm
thus
going to do
among
next.
traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time and came after nightfall to Klausenburg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which was very good but thirsty. Memorandum. Get recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika Händel, and that, as it was a national dish, I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having had some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some
LibriVox
knowledge of
definitely
the
has
country
a
hardly failed to
wide
have some
selection.
importance in dealing with the noblemen of that country. I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality
Hey,
of
Shorts, how
the
you doing?
Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own Ordnance Survey maps. But I found that Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them the Wallachs, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyars in the west, and Zekalese in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in it.
That would be a good one.
I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of
The Genghis
some sort
Khan
of
one
magic
sounds like it'd be a good one.
If so, my stay may be very interesting. Memorandum. I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams.
Oh, not lately,
There
Shorts.
was a dog howling all night.
I'm kind of retired
which
from
may have
hopping
had something
trains.
to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe, and was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept, and was wakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika, and a sort of porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamaliga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish, which they call impletata. Memorandum. Get recipe for this also. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more uncomfortable the train. what ought they to be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on the top of steep hills, such as we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams, which seemed from the wide stony margin on each side of them to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water, and running strong, to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers, but others were very picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when you got near them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or other, and most of them had big belts with a lot of strips of something fluttering from them, like the dresses in a ballet, but of course there were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy, dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them, and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage they would be set down at once as some old Oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless, and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place. Being practically on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina, it has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks, and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war proper being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress, white undergarment with a long double apron, front and back, of colored stuff, fitting almost too tight for modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The Herr Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white shirt-sleeves, who had followed her to the door. He went, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friends, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass my carriage will await you, and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." 4th of May. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count, directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to details he seemed somewhat reticent, and pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least he answered my questions
Because check
exactly
this
as I
out,
did. He and his wife,
because
the old lady who had
D-Man, because see, it's
looked at each other in a frightened sort of
let's
way.
see if I can actually get you.
He mumbled out that the money had been sent in
Because
the
it's
letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me anything of his
there you go.
gossip, both he and
But
his wife
it's
crossed
an app
themselves,
on your phone too
and,
that you can
saying
get.
that they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak further. It was so near the time of starting.
I know,
that
even
I
on
had no
the
time to look
app
at
on the
anyone
phone
else,
is public domain,
for
because
it
that's
was
what I'm
all very
playing it on right
mysterious,
now.
and not by any means comforting. Just before I was leaving, an old lady came up to my room and said in a hysterical way, "Must you
Because
go?
that's how I'm doing it.
Oh,
Is I
young man,
downloaded
must
it
you go?"
for the app on
She
my
was
phone.
in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew, and
It's
mixed it
still
all up with some
Liverbox,
other
but it's an
language
app
which
you
I
can
did
get.
not know at all. I was just able to follow her by asking many questions.
See?
When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was
Let me see.
engaged on important business, she asked again,
Mm.
"Do you know what day it is?" I answered that it was the 4th of May. She shook her head as she said again, "Oh yes, I know that. But do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I did not understand, she went on, "It is
Yeah,
the
it's
eve
still a
of
free
St.
one.
George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil
Yep.
things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you are going, and what you are going to?" She was in such evident distress that I tried
And
to
it takes
comfort her,
up
but
a little
without
bit of
effect.
room depending on your books.
Finally, she went down on her knees
You
and
could
implored me
download
not to go, at least
3 or
wait
4
a day or
books,
two before starting.
but I use
It was
I
all
have a
very
spare
ridiculous,
phone that I
and I did not
use.
feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I tried to raise her up, and said as gravely as I could that I thanked her, but my duty was imperative, and that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking a crucifix from her neck, offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for, as an English churchman, I have been taught to regard such things as in some measure idolatrous, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well
Because
and in
on
so
my
state a
phone I
mind.
got
She
let's
saw,
see.
I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary round my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and then
Because I
left
got
the room.
63 book titles
I am writing up this part of the diary
downloaded
while
from my
trying to wait for the coach,
from my
which is,
Audible,
of course, late.
and then I
The
have
crucifix is still
about
around my
6
neck.
books downloaded from my Liverbox.
Whether it is the old lady's fear, or the many ghostly traditions of this place, or the crucifix itself, I do not know, but I am not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Here comes the coach. 5th of May. The Castle. The grey of the morning has passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged, whether with trees or hills I know not,
But even with the
for it is so
Liverbox, you
far
should
off
be able to
that big
download
winds
a
and
good amount.
breezes are mixed. I am not sleepy, and as I am not to be called till I awake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many
I
odd
didn't think
things
about that about being confusing.
lest who reads them may fancy that I dined too well before I left Bistritz. Let me put down my dinner exactly. I dined on what they called robber steak, bits of bacon, onions, seasoned with red pepper and strung on salt, and roasted over the fire in simple style of the London cat cheese. The wine was golden mediash, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses of this, and nothing else. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking to the landlady.
That's what you tell them. The
They were
voices in
evidently
your
talking
head.
of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pitying me. I could hear a lot of words often
Time to do
repeated,
some dabs.
queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I
Lemon
quietly
pound
got
cake.
my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them out. I must say they were not cheering to me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Toko, Hell, Stregoica, Witch, Brolak, and Rukoslak, both mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other Serbian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Memorandum. I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed two fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm, or guard, against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted, and so sorrowful, and so sympathetic,
Take a drink
that I could
before.
not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn yard, and its crowd of picturesque figures, all crossing themselves, as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage of oleander and orange trees in green tubs, clustered in the centre of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the box seat, boxa, they called it, his big whip over the fourth which ran grass, I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scene as we drove along, although had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steep hills, crowned with clumps of farmhouses, the branches of the road. There, a bewildering mass of fruit blossom, apple, plum, pear, cherry. And as we drove by, I saw green grass under the trees, spangled with the fallen petals. In and out amongst these green hills of what they call here the Mittelland ran the road, losing itself as it swept round the grassy curve, or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillsides like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo. I was told that this road is in summertime excellent, but that it had not yet been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect it is different from the general run of roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that
So
they
that
are
was a
not
good
to
hit.
be kept in too good order. Of old, the hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turks should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittelland rose mighty slopes of forest up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling full upon them, and bringing out all the glorious colors of this beautiful range. Deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where grass and rock mingled, and an endless perspective of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where
Excuse
the
me.
snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which,
And that time to
as
hit
the
my
sun
bowl
began
again.
to sink, we saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept round the base of a hill, and opened up the lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain, which seemed, as we wound on our serpentine way, to be right before us. "Look, Istenzek, God's seat," and he crossed himself reverently.
You see, pretty much reaching
As
distance. I
we
have
wound
my
on our
bowl,
endless way, and the sun
my
sank lower
dab
and
rig,
lower behind us, the shadows of the evening
nice,
began to creep round
and
us.
my vape
This
pins,
was emphasized by the fact
or my
that
dab
snowy
pins, should I
mountaintops
say.
still held the sunset, and seemed to glow out with a delicate, cool pink.
My two
Here
dab
and
pins,
there we passed
my bowl,
checks and
my
slovaks,
dab rig.
all in picturesque attire, but I noticed that Goitre was painfully by the roadside were many crosses, and as we
And they
swept
got
by,
to
my
helps me
companions all crossed
get to sleep.
themselves. Here and there
Because
was
if
a
not, I'll
village
be
man
up
or
all
woman,
night
kneeling
into the
before a
morning.
shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me. For instance, hay ricks in the trees, and here and there very beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a Leiterwagen, the ordinary peasant's cart, with its long, snake-like vertebra, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs with their white, and the Slovaks with their collared sheepskins, the latter carrying lance-fashion their long staves, with
And the
axes
best
ends.
part is, I have my
When the
medical
evening
card to
fell,
have
it
it.
began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness with gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine, though in the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills, as we ascended through the pass, the dark firs stood out here and there against the background of late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through what seemed in the darkness to be closed, great masses of grayness, which here and there bestrewed the trees, produced a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fancies engendered earlier in the evening, when the falling sunset threw into strange relief the ghost-like clouds, which amongst the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys. Sometimes the hills were so steep that, despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up them as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. "No, no," he said, "you must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added, with what he evidently meant for grim pleasantry, for he looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest, "and you may have enough of such matters before you go to sleep." The only stop he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and with wild cries of encouragement urged them on to further exertions. Then through the darkness I could see a sort of patch of grey light ahead of us, as though there were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather springs, and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had the road became level, and we appeared to fly along. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side, and to frown down upon us. We were entering on the Borgo Pass. One by one several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with an earnestness which would take no denial. These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and that same strange mixture of fear-meaning movements which I had seen outside the hole at Bistritz, the sign of the cross, and the guard against the evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected, but though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept on for some little time, and at last we saw before us the pass opening out on the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of it seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which the steam from our hard-driven horses rose in a white cloud. We could see now the sandy
That looks
road
good.
lying white before us, but there was on it no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which I could hardly hear, it was spoken so quietly, and in so low a tone. I thought it was an hour less than the time. Then, turning to me, he spoke in German worse than my own. "There is no carriage here. The Herr is not expected after all. You will now come on to Bukovina, and return tomorrow or the next day. Better the next day." Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants and a universal crossing of themselves, a calèche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them that the horses were coal-black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight, as he turned to us. He said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply, "The English Herr was in a hurry." To which the stranger replied, "That is why, I suppose, you wished him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth, with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to
That's a
another
lot
a
of
line from
boxes.
Berger's Lenore, "Den die Toten reiten schnell," for the dead travel fast. The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned his face away, at the same time putting out his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the Herr's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding alacrity my bags were handed out and put in the calèche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the calèche was close alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word he shook the reins, the horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam from the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected against it the figures of my late companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses, and off they swept on their way to Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me take all care of you. There is a flask of Slivovitz, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat, if you should require it." I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely, and not a little frightened. I think had there been any alternative I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along. Then we made a complete turn, and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again, and so I took note of some salient point, and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that, placed as I was, any protest would have had no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. By and by, however, as I was curious to know how time was passing, I struck a match, and by its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited, with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road, a long, agonized wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another and another, till, borne on the wind, which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side of us, began a louder and a sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend, and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them, and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of horse-tamers doing, and with extraordinary effect, for under his caresses they became quite manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins, started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed in with trees, which in places arched right over the roadway till we passed as through a tunnel. And again great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing round on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head to left and right, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint, flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He at once checked the horses, and, jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. I did not know what to do, the less as the howling of the wolves grew closer. But while I wondered, the driver suddenly reappeared again, and without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, and now looking back, it is like a sort of awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared so near the road that even in the darkness around us I could watch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illumine the place around it at all, and, gathering a few stones, formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect. When he stood between me and the flame, he did not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker all the same. This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me, straining through the darkness. Then for a time there were no blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following in a moving circle. At last there came a time when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible in the grim silence which held them than even when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It is only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import. Once the wolves began to howl as though the moonlight had had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared, and looked helplessly round with eyes that rolled in a way painful to see. But the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called to the coachman to come, for it seemed to me that our only chance was to try to break out through the ring, and to aid his approach I shouted and beat the side of the caleche, hoping by the noise to scare the wolves from the side so as to give him a chance of reaching the trap. How he came there I know not, but I heard his voice raised in a tone of imperious command, and, looking towards the sounds, saw him stand in the roadway.
Excuse me.
As he swept his long arms as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle, the wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so that we were again in darkness. When I could see again, the driver was climbing into the caleche, and the wolves disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, as the clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main always ascending. Suddenly I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the sky. End of chapter 1. Recorded on November 2nd, 2005, in Oceanside, California.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 2. Jonathan Harker's Journal continued. 5th of May. I must have been asleep, for certainly if I had been fully awake I must have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place. In the gloom the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it under
I think it just varies from book to book.
Than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vice and would have crushed mine if he had chosen. Then he took my traps and placed them on the ground beside me as I stood close to a great door, old and studded with large iron nails, and set in a projecting doorway of massive stone. I could see, even in the dim light, that the stone was massively carved, but that the carving had been much worn by time and weather. As I stood, the driver jumped again into his seat and shook the reins. The horses started forward, and trap and all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign. Through these frowning walls and dark window openings it was not likely that my voice could penetrate. The time I waited seemed endless, and I felt doubts and fears crowding upon me. What sort of place had I come to, and among what kind of people? What sort of grim adventure was it on which I had embarked? Was this a customary incident in the life of a solicitor's clerk, sent out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk. Mina would not like that. Solicitor, for just before leaving London I got word that my examination was successful and I am now a full-blown solicitor. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I were awake. It all seemed like a horrible nightmare to me, and I expected that I should suddenly awake and find myself at home, the dawn struggling in through the windows, as I had now and again felt in the morning after a day of overwork. But my flesh answered the pinching test, my eyes were not to be deceived. I was indeed awake and among the Carpathians. All I could do now was to be patient and to wait the coming of morning. Just as I had come to this conclusion, I heard a heavy step approaching behind the great door, and I saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was the sound of rattling chains and the clanking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall old man, clean-shaven save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame burned without a chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long, quivering shadows that flickered in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me in with his right hand with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, and of your own free will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." The strength of the handshake was so much akin to what I had noticed in the driver, whose face I had not seen, that for a moment I doubted if it were not the same person to whom I was speaking. So to make sure, I said interrogatively, "Count Dracula?" He bowed in a courtly way as he replied, "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in. The night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." As he was speaking, he put the lamp on a bracket on the wall, and stepping out, took my luggage. He had carried it in before I could forestall him. I protested, but he insisted. "Nay, sir, you are my guest. It is late, and my people are not available. Let me see to your comfort myself." He insisted on carrying my traps along the passage, and then up a great winding stair, and along another great passage, on whose stone floor our steps rang heavily. At the end of this, he threw open a heavy door, and I rejoiced to see within a well-lit room in which
What kind of coins are you getting done?
and on whose mighty hearth a great fire of logs, freshly replenished, flamed and flared. The Count halted, putting down my bags, closed the door, and crossing the room opened another door, which led into a small octagonal room lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door, and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom well lighted and warmed by another log fire also added to it lately, for the top logs were fresh, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying, before he closed the door, "You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself by making your toilette. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, I discovered that I was half famished with hunger, so making a hasty toilette, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood on one side of the great fireplace, leaning against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand toward the table and said, "I pray you be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already, and I do not sup." I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then, with a charming smile, he handed it to me to read. One passage of it at least gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am a constant sufferer, forbids absolutely any travelling on my part for some time to come. But I am happy to say I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend on you when you will during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters." The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to at once on an excellent roast chicken. This, with some cheese and a salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating it, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and by my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and begun to smoke a cigar which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him of a very marked physiognomy. His face was strong, a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, and with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the moustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they had seemed rather white and fine, but seeing them now close to me I could not but notice that they were rather coarse, broad with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile, which showed more than he had yet done of his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened, I heard as if from down below in the valley
Had to adjust that.
many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression in my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till the afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." With a courteous bow, he opened for me himself the door of the octagonal room, and I entered my bedroom. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt. I fear. I think strange things which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. 7th of May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept till late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped, and found a cold breakfast laid out, with the coffee kept hot by a pot being placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table, on which was written, "I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D." I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell, so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are round me. The table service is of gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains and upholstery of the chairs and sofas, and the hangings of my bed are of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still, in none of the rooms is there a mirror. There is not even a toilette glass on my table, and I had to get a little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle, except the howling of wolves. Some time after I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it, I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room. Book, newspaper, or even writing materials. So I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine I tried, but found it locked. In the library I found to my great...
Oh, what happened? I'm not sure what happened there. Let's see. I straight got disconnected. Give me a sec, y'all. There we go. There we go. I think.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 2. Jonathan Harker's Journal continued. 5th of May. I must have been asleep, for certainly if I had been fully awake I must have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place. In the gloom the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it under great round arches, it perhaps seemed bigger than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vice that could have crushed mine if he had
Wait a
chosen.
minute. That's not what I'm supposed to be saying.
And placed
It's not supposed to.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Gordon Mackenzie. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 3. Jonathan Harker's Journal continued. When I found that I was a prisoner, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all other feelings, and I looked back after a few hours.
Give me a sec, everyone. My liver box isn't wanting to work right now. It's mainly because it's not downloaded.
LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer,
This one's
please
actually
visit
downloaded, so this one should run a lot
LibriVox.org.
smoother.
Recorded by Corey Samuel. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Inferno, Canto 1. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, what was this forest, savage, rough, and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear. So bitter is it, death is little more. But of the good treat, which there I found, speak will I of the other things I saw there. I cannot well repeat how there I entered, so full was I of slumber at the moment in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached a mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated, which had with consternation pierced my heart, upward I looked, and I beheld its shoulders, vested already with that planet's rays, which leadeth others right by every road. Then was the fear a little quieted, that in my heart's lake had endured throughout the night which I had passed so piteously. And even as he who, with distressful breath, forth issued from the sea upon the shore, turns to the water perilous and gazes, so did my soul, that still was fleeing onward, turn itself back to re-behold the pass, which never yet a living person left. After my weary
Nice.
body I had rested, the waves
The cake ones are
on the
usually
desert
always
slope,
been good.
so that the firm foot ever was the lower. And lo, almost where the ascent began, a panther, light and swift exceedingly, which with a spotted skin was covered o'er, and never moved she from before my face, nay, rather did impede so much my way, that many times I to return had turned. The time was the beginning of the morning, and up the sun was mounting with those stars, that with him were, what time the love divine at first in motion set those beauteous things. So were to me occasion of good hope, the variegated skin of that wild beast, the hour of time, and the delicious season, but not so much that did not give me fear, a lion's aspect which appeared to me, He seemed as if against me he were coming, with head uplifted, and with ravenous hunger, so that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf, that with all hungerings seemed to be laden in her meagreness, and many folk has caused to live forlorn. She brought upon me so much heaviness, with the affright that from her aspect came, that I the hope relinquished of the height. And as he is who willingly acquires, and the time comes that causes him to lose, who weeps in all his thoughts and is despondent, e'en such made me that beast withouten peace, which, coming on against me by degrees, thrust me back thither where the sun is silent. While I was rushing downward to the lowland, before mine eyes did one present himself, who seemed from long continued silence hoarse. When I beheld him in the desert vast, "Have pity on me," unto him I cried, "whiche'er thou art, or shade, or real man." He answered me, "Not man, man once I was, and both my parents were of Lombardy, and Mantuans by country both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though it was late, and lived at Rome under the good Augustus, during the time of false and lying gods. A poet was I, and I sang that just, son of Anchises, who came forth from Troy, after that Ilion the superb was burned. But thou, why'st go thou back to such annoyance? Why climb'st thou not the Mount Delectable, which is the source and cause of every joy? Now, art thou that Virgilius, and that fountain which spreads abroad so wide a river of speech?" I made response to him, with bashful forehead. "Oh, of the other poets honour and light avail me the long study and great love that have impelled me to explore thy volume. Thou art my master, and my author thou. Thou art alone the one from whom I took the beautiful style that has done honour to me. Behold the beast, for which I have turned back. Do thou protect me from her, famous sage, for she doth make my veins and pulses tremble." "Thee it behooves to take another road," responded he, when he beheld me weeping, "if from this savage place thou wouldst escape, because this beast, at which thou criest out, suffers not any one to pass her way, but so doth harass him that she destroys him, and has a nature so malign and ruthless, that never doth she glut her greedy will, and after food is hungrier than before. Many the animals with whom she weds, and more they shall be still, until the greyhound comes, who shall make her perish in her pain. He shall not feed on either earth or pelf, but upon wisdom, and on love and virtue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be. Of that low Italy shall he be the saviour, on whose account the maid Camilla died. Euryalus, Turnus, Nisus of their wounds. Through every city shall he hunt her down, till he shall have driven her back to hell, there from whence envy first did let her loose. Therefore I think, and judge it for thy best, thou follow me, and I will be thy guide, and lead thee hence through the eternal place, where thou shalt hear the desperate lamentations, shall see the ancient spirits disconsolate, who cry out each one for the second death. And thou shalt see those who contented are within the fire, because they hope to come, whene'er it may be, to the blessed people. To whom, then, if thou wishest to ascend, a soul shall be for that, the nigh more worthy. With her at my departure I will leave thee, because that emperor who reigns above, in that I was rebellious to his law, wills that through me none come into his city. He governs everywhere, and there he reigns. There is his city and his lofty throne. Oh, happy he whom thereto he elects. And I to him, Poet, I thee entreat, by that same God whom thou didst never know, that I may escape this woe and worse. Thou wouldst conduct me there, where thou hast said, that I may see the portal of St. Peter, and those thou makest so disconsolate. Then he moved on, and I behind him followed. End of Canto 1. Inferno, Canto 2. Day was departing, and the embrowned air released the animals that are on earth from their fatigues, and I, the only one, made myself ready to sustain the war, both of the way and likewise of the woe, which memory that errs not shall retrace. O Muses, O high genius, now assist me. O memory, that didst write down what I saw, here thy nobility shall be manifest. And I began. Poet, who guidest me, regard my manhood, if it be sufficient, ere to the arduous pass thou dost confide me. Thou sayest, that of Silvius the parent, while yet corruptible, unto the world immortal went, and was there bodily. But if the adversary of all evil was courteous, thinking of the high effect that issue would from him, and who, and what, to men of intellect unmeet it seems not. For he was of great Rome, and of her empire, in the imperial heaven as father chosen. The which and what, wishing to speak the truth, was stablished as the holy place, wherein sits the successor of the greatest Peter. Upon this journey, whence thou givest him vaunt, things did he hear, which the occasion were both of his victory and the papal mantle. Thither went afterwards the chosen vessel, to bring back comfort thence unto that faith, which of salvation's way is the beginning. But I, why thither come, or who concedes it? I not Aeneas am, I am not Paul, nor I, nor others think me worthy of it. Therefore, if I resign myself to come, I fear the coming may be ill advised. Thou art wise, and knowest better than I speak. And as he is, who unwills what he willed, and by new thoughts doth his intention change, so that from his design he quite withdraws, such I became on that dark hillside, because in thinking I consumed the emprise, which was so very prompt in the beginning. If I have well thy language understood, replied that shade of the magnanimous, thy soul attainted is with cowardice, which many times a man encumbers so, it turns him back from honoured enterprise, as false sight doth a beast when he is shy. That thou mayest free thee from this apprehension, I'll tell thee why I came, and what I heard at the first moment when I grieved for thee. Among those was I who are in suspense, and a fair saintly lady called to me, in such wise I besought her to command me. Her eyes were shining brighter than the star, and she began to say, gentle and low, with voice angelical, in her own language, O Spirit, courteous of Mantua, of whom the fame still in the world endures, and shall endure, long-lasting as the world, a friend of mine, and not the friend of fortune, upon the desert slope is so impeded upon his way, that he is turned through terror, and may, I fear, already be so lost, that I too late have risen to his succour. From that which I have heard of him in heaven, bestir thee now, and with thy speech ornate, and with what needful is for his release, assist him so, that I may be consoled. Beatrice am I, who do bid thee go. I come from there, where I would fain return. Love moved me, which compelleth me to speak. When I shall be in presence of my Lord, full often will I praise thee unto him. Then paused she, and thereafter I began. O Lady of Virtue, thou alone through whom the human race exceedeth all, contained within the heaven that has the lesser circles. So grateful unto me is thy commandment, to obey if 'twere already done were late. No farther needst thou ope to me thy wish. But the cause, tell me why thou dost not shun the here descending down into this centre, from the vast place thou burnest to return to. Since thou wouldst fain so inwardly discern, briefly will I relate, she answered me, why I am not afraid to enter here. Of those things only should one be afraid, which have the power of doing others harm. Of the rest, no, because they are not fearful. God in his mercy such created me, that misery of yours attains me not, nor any fear assails me of this burning. A gentle lady is in heaven, who grieves at this impediment to which I send thee, so that stern judgment there above is broken. In her entreaty she besought Lucia, and said, thy faithful one now stands in need of thee, and unto thee I recommend him. Lucia, foe of all that cruel is, hastened away, and came unto the place where I was sitting with the ancient Rachel. Beatrice, said she, the true praise of God, why succourest thou not him who loved thee so? For thee he issued from the vulgar herd. Dost thou not hear the pity of his plaint? Dost thou not see the death that combats him, beside that flood where ocean has no vaunt? Never were persons in the world so swift to work their weal and to escape their woe, as I, after such words as these were uttered, came hither downward from my blessed seat, confined.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.